All right, today is study session part 2 of the national exam. So you guys are getting ready for your national exam, and this will help you with 20 questions that'll likely appear on your exam. And as always, this is an interactive study group, so please, you don't have to raise your hand. If you think you know the answer, call it out. Attempting to answer the question is better than not attempting at all, because Hallie can tell you, Sam, that the national test is hard. So we definitely want to study up for that national exam twice as hard as you do for your state exam. It is the tough one. It is the tough one. So let's jump right into it. What is the definition of real property?
Land and anything affixed to it.
You got it. Land and everything permanently attached to it. So think of real estate as stuff you can touch. Land and building equal real property. So a lot of sellers, when you go in, do not understand what real property is. And I just had a conversation with one of our licensed agents the other day who has a house under contract. And she did notify the seller before listing the property that the seller made mention that they were really, really attached to the chandeliers in the property. And she had mentioned to them before putting it on the market that they needed to remove and replace any chandeliers in the property that they wanted to keep, because chandeliers are real estate property. Why? Because they are permanently affixed, permanently screwed in to a box that is screwed into the beam that travels to the foundation and touches the land. Therefore, it is real property. Unfortunately for this agent, the seller did not heed her warning and decided halfway through the transaction that the buyers could not have the chandeliers, that they were going to take them down. The buyers are also very attached to the chandeliers, and the deal fell apart. So anything permanently affixed to the land is considered real property. That means any light fixtures, the toilet, the hand towel holders that are drilled into the drywall, those are real property. Appliances are not real property unless they are built in. So a refrigerator is not real property because it's not mounted to the wall. However, a dishwasher is real property because it is mounted to the cabinets that are then mounted to the floor, which are then mounted to the beams that travel down to the foundation, which touches the land. So if you can move it around the property and away from the wall, and it is freestanding, it is not real estate. But if it is anchored in any way to the home, it is real property. What is the primary purpose of zoning laws? What is the primary purpose of zoning laws? All right. It is to regulate land use. Zoning equals zones equals control of use. So we think about zoning. I was just talking about zoning today with my husband in regards to a commercial building we owned in downtown Newcastle, where one of the contractors that's replacing the windows were arguing with him over uniform building code, stating that the windows needed to meet uniformed residential building code. However, the property downtown is zoned C2, which is dense commercial. So there is no residential homes in downtown Newcastle. Therefore, there was this big debate. So we have to pull out our zoning permit that says what we can use that property for based on what the government allows. And our commercial building does not permit residential units to be in that building. It is commercial only. So that is a zoning. That's a zoning ordinance. And for us to put residential in this property, we would have to get a variance permit for use outside of the zoning. So zoning regulates the land use for the good of the people within a municipality or jurisdiction. What is required for a deed to be valid? What are some of the things required for a deed to be valid?
Don't both parties have to agree on the terms, or is that, I think that's the right one?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. If agreement is required, there's more to a deed though. And let me show you here. You have to have the grantor's signature. It has to be delivered to the party, and there has to be acceptance by the other party. So the person who currently owns the land must sign their right away to the land, giving that to the buyer. It must be delivered to the buyer after the seller signs it, and the buyer must accept it. So signature, delivery, acceptance. And the last thing is competency. Both parties must be competent. And what does that mean, competency?
They know what they're doing legally, or they've been given their all the legal information for them to know exactly what's going on.
Well, competent means that both parties can have the ability to understand what they are doing or what they are accepting. So they must be of sound mind, and they must be over the age of 18, because persons under the age of 18 under the law are not considered to be of competent mind because their minds are still developing. They're not adults. So there has to be a grantor and acceptance by competent parties who can understand what they are giving or accepting. So
Does this also include, like, if somebody has a mental disability and isn't able to really make the right call because of their disability?
absolutely.
Like they
And
would need a payee or something like that. They'd need that person there as well.
yeah, so, and we do run into this from time to time in real estate where there is a question of competency, and that's where your fiduciary responsibility will come into your client. If you ever feel that your client is maybe not of sound mind or does not understand, and that could be for a broad umbrella of reasons. It could be because you have somebody who maybe does have some type of mental disability. It could be because of an aging client that is having a hard time understanding just because the world has changed so much. It could be a language barrier, and we run into that a lot as well, where we have somebody who does not speak English. So we need to make sure that we're creating a bubble around the person and protecting them from things that they may not know. So if you ever run into that situation, it's important just to come to me immediately and say, hey, I think that we may have a competency issue and this is why. If it's a language barrier, that's when we would get an interpreter involved, somebody who's a licensed and certified interpreter. If it is a issue of competency, we may reach out to their attorney if they have one, maybe a family member, to make sure that there's no competency issues there, to see if they have a power of attorney. So that's where we kind of have to investigate it to make sure that we're doing the best that we can for our client in all situations, while being as, while being as kind to the client during the period of them not understanding or them feeling overwhelmed. What is the difference between a general warranty deed and a quitclaim deed?
A quitclaim deed provides no protection, correct?
Correct. Absolutely. You got that must have been on your practice test there, Alex. Yes, a quitclaim deed provides zero protection. So a general warranty deed provides full protection. So there's three deeds that we hear about the most when it comes to your national exams and in practice. Those are general warranty deeds, special warranty deeds, and quitclaim. Now, a lot of people say quick claim because they can be written quickly, but it's not. It's quit claim. And they may try to trip you up on your test and say, well, what is the answer? And you may see quick claim deed because people say it all the time. It drives me batty. All right, so your general warranty deed provides you full protection. It has general protection. The seller is saying for the life and history of this property, everything has been paid off. There are no liens and encumbrances that are going to fall to you. I'm providing full protection. And if anything comes back, even if it was 100 years ago, I'm responsible. Okay, so that's general warranty. That's the seller taking on the full responsibility of the history of the property. Now, special warranty, which is not on here, but that may also be a question. Special warranty means that the seller is saying, I will specially protect what I've done only. I will specially protect what I've done as a seller only. So think special warranty, seller, SS. And that just means that I can't tell you what happened before I owned the property. I did my due diligence, but now it's time for you to do your own. But I promise that since I've owned the property, there's nothing on here that title hasn't found or I haven't told you about. And if there is, I'll take care of it. It's my responsibility. Quit claim means there's no guarantees. I quit any claim, no promises. I quit. It means that I own this house. I don't know what happened 100 years ago. I don't really care what I've done with it. You're just taking it, like whatever debt I've put on it, whatever clouds I've put on title, whatever claims come back on this property is not my problem. I quit. Hands in the air. I quit. I quit. Take the house or don't take the house. I make no promises. Okay. So general full protection, special is during the period of time that the seller owned the property only. And quit claim means I don't care what happened to it. I'm not telling you what happened to it. Like you just take my problem. Okay. What is the difference between market value and market price? What is the difference between market value and market price? All right.
Is market value what someone is willing to pay for it?
No, market value is the estimate of what it could potentially be worth based on its sales comps. And the market price is the actual selling price.
And the selling price. Okay.
So think of this like going to buy a new car and you're on the lot and you're going to buy a car and they have those stickers in the windows that says manufacturer's retail price. And it'll say $89,500. But then it'll say today's price only at Bobby Ray Hall is $75,000 out the door, right? So same is true with real estate, that your market value is what the actual retail value based on its comps is. So it's an estimated value based on what we think it could sell for, but its market price is its actual selling price. So the price is what you pay, the value is what it's worth. Sometimes buyers get a great price because the value of the property or the appraisal value is much higher. So say the value that an agent lists the property for is $500,000, but then a buyer puts in an offer and they end up getting the home for $450,000. So the actual price is $450,000, the value is $500,000. But in a market where we've got multiple offers, sometimes that's reversed, where an agent lists the property at $500,000, but there's so much interest in it. We get multiple offers and it drives that price up. Well, then all of a sudden the buyer's paying $550,000 for it. So they may be overpaying for the property. So it doesn't make its value go up. It only makes the actual selling price go up. All right. So price is what you've paid. Value is what it's worth. What is a CMA?
CMA is when an agent does the comps of the neighborhood to compare the value of the homes around the home they are listing.
Yes, absolutely. It is a tool used to estimate value based on comparable properties. So if you want a little hint, CMA means compare my area. A CMA should never be used as a tool for an appraisal. It is an estimated price to help sell and market a property. Our tool that we use here for our CMAs is called RPR, and that's available if you are a NAR member. That helps us check the value of the property based on similar homes that have sold within the neighborhood that are of similar size, similar styles, similar bedrooms, similar baths, number of garages, within a very small radius to the home over a period of maybe 6 to 12 months, depending on what your search parameters are. A CMA now has grown to the point where it's showing area demographics, where the schools are, where the hospitals are, where people are working, what their median income is. So our CMAs have really become more than just a way to estimate the value, but also what value we're listing the home at in comparison to who our demographic is and who we're going to be advertising that property to. What does sub-agency mean? This one's a tough one. What does sub-agency mean?
Is it the one where they don't have to stick with the agent that they can sub other agents into the deal?
No.
No?
No, this one's tough. We don't use sub-agency very often here in Pennsylvania, which is why it's so tricky because it's not very common here. But sub-agency is when a broker works with a buyer while representing the seller. So the tip is subordinate to the seller. So an example of this would be is if I have a house listed in Elwood City and I represent the seller, and then an unrepresented buyer comes in and wants to make an offer because they saw it at an open house. The first thing I do is ask the buyer, are you currently represented by a real estate agent? And they say no. Well, then I would ask the buyer, would you like me to be a dual agent and also represent you to the seller? And they say no. Okay. There's two ways that I can work with this buyer, and I can give them options. And well, if you want me to work for you, I can work for you as a transaction licensee, which means I do all of your paperwork. I help you through the transaction, but I don't represent you. And there's a fee for that. Or I can work with you as a sub-agent, meaning that you are representing yourself, but I still represent the seller. So everything that you tell me is not confidential. So most buyers will opt for having dual representation, which means that everything they tell that agent is now 100% confidential, and I can't run back and tell my seller. My fiduciary responsibility is exactly the same to the buyer as it is the seller. Or they would opt for a transaction licensee, just meaning that I'm going to do all of their paperwork and help them through the transaction. They're going to pay me a small fee in lieu of me being their agent. So we really don't run into sub-agents a whole lot, but it may come up on your test. All right, question number 8, what is fiduciary duty?
It is your relationship with your client, that they can trust you, you can guide them, you can teach them in the transaction or whatever you guys are working on together. It's like a trust relationship.
It is. It is a duty of trust and loyalty owed to your client. Fiduciary means faithful friend. So there's a few things that you have to do for all consumers, and that is deal with them fairly and honestly. But when somebody becomes your client, then you have to hold them to a higher level, and you have to make sure that they can trust you and you have loyalty to them. You also have to do as instructed, even if you don't necessarily agree, as long you have, it's called obedience. You have obedience to that client as long as they're not breaking any laws. So fiduciary is a duty of trust and loyalty. What is an option contract? A contract that gives the buyer the right, but not the obligation to buy. So an option contract is a contract that gives the buyer the right, but not the obligation to buy. Now, this can happen in a couple different circumstances, but the easiest to remember and the most common is when we have a tenant that has a leasehold interest in a property, meaning we have a tenant that's living in a landlord's property and there is a lease involved. Sometimes they will give them a land purchase contract on it or an option contract. Now, when we have the option contract, it says, the landlord says, hey, in the future, if I ever decide to sell the property that you are renting, you will be given the first option to purchase the property at X amount of dollars, and you will have 7 or 14 days or whatever the days are. It could be 24 hours, but whatever those number of days are to enact your option, or I have the right to sell it to somebody else. So it just gives the option to buy it first. So I have the option, but not the obligation to buy it. What is a net listing? Also not very common in Pennsylvania. Right. A net listing is where an agent keeps any amount above a set sales price. So again, not very common in Pennsylvania. A lot of brokers and agents see this as not in the seller's best interest, but they are legal. They are part of your test. So taking a net listing would be, I go to a seller appointment and he says, I want to get 200, I need to walk away with 250,000 from a house. And you say, okay, well, let's run the comps. And it looks like your comp set at 265. So if we listed at 265 after all of your costs, allowing for an offer, seller assist, this would be your net. And the seller says, no, I don't care what you sell it for. I'm not paying commission out of my sales price. I want 250 and you can keep anything above that. So the reason why it gets a little hairy is because this allows the agent to really set a price or a standard that is much higher than maybe will allow for a transaction that is in the seller's best interest. So an agent could literally at that point go out and say, okay, I'm going to list the house for 300,000, which is way above where the market will allow, and therefore never really ending up into an accepted agreement, or can then reject offers based on what that individual agent wants to be paid, instead of having a contract with the seller ahead of time that says, this is what I get paid, these are the terms. So it gets really hairy, and usually it's all well and good until you get that offer that isn't accepted. And then somebody has some hard feelings. Either the agent is losing money because the seller's not netting 250 and the agent has to bring money to closing to close it out, or the seller feels that the agent is making too much and being greedy. So these net listing scenarios are often not permitted here in Pennsylvania. But again, it may be on your test. Net listing equals net profits to seller, agent takes the rest. What is the purpose of RESPA, the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act? To protect consumers by requiring disclosure of settlement costs and preventing kickbacks. So this applies to residential transactions involving federally related mortgage loans. So there is a disclosure process when a client is taking a loan on the property that is required, that outlines exactly what their anticipated costs are going to be. In addition to that, real estate brokers, agents, mortgage loan officers, the entire industry is not permitted from taking kickbacks to certain vendors or businesses to bring them business from consumers. So this protects consumers. This gives them the ability to select who their service providers are going to be based on their performance and not who is paying the most. This also requires us all to give them an estimated cost sheet and a HUD or ALTA, and it would be an ALTA if they have a federally backed loan, before closing on a property, so that they are well aware of what their costs are going to be and what costs are associated with purchasing real estate. What is a bilateral contract?
Okay, the bilateral contract. I'm trying to remember which one.
We'll break it down. Bi means what?
Two.
Okay.
So when two people are involved in a contract equally?
Yeah, you're on the right track. You're on the right track. So a bilateral contract is when two people have promises to one another. So it's a mutual agreement that says party A is going to do this and party B is going to do this. So they both make promises on each side. Bi meaning two promises. So we think of unilateral, meaning unilateral, when we have a listing contract. The real estate agent is promising to bring to market and bring an offer to a seller. The seller promises really nothing until that sales agreement is signed, right? So the sellers really doesn't have any, they're not promising anything. They're not promising like, hey, I'll be really nice to you, or if you list my property, even if it doesn't sell, I'm going to pay you. It's unilateral. Bilateral is when we have two promises, kind of like a standard agreement of sale. We have a buyer that wants to buy and a seller that wants to sell. The buyer is going to pay X amount of dollars and the seller is going to provide clear and insurable title. So that's a bilateral agreement. There's two parties both promising something to the other. What is the purpose of earnest money?
It's money deposited by the buyer to secure the contract.
No. In theory, but no.
I remember it's also considered hand money.
Mm-hmm. So this one's a little tough. This is just to show that the buyer is serious about the offer.
Okay.
The earnest money, also known as hand money or escrow funds, in actuality has nothing to do with the validity, I can't talk, of the contract at all. You actually don't need earnest money to have a binding contract. Both parties can agree that there is no hand money, that there is no earnest money. But having earnest money shows that the buyer is so serious that they're putting up money that they're willing to lose if they back out. So earnest money is very common. It's very, very rare for us to do any type of offer or sales agreement without it, because then the buyer has nothing to lose if they just walk away. However, it's really not required to make a contract enforceable if both parties waive their right to having earnest money in escrow.
Can I ask you a question really quick?
Yeah.
So like, what would be, say like someone is interested in buying a home for say $200,000. What would be like, is there a percentage that is like considered what you should put down for earnest money? Or is it just like whatever they feel is suitable just to show that they're serious about it?
There is no right or wrong answer.
Okay.
Yeah, there's definitely no right or wrong answer. It just depends on who you ask. So the answer is subjective.
Okay.
If you ask some people, they're going to say, well, they should be putting 10% down at minimum.
Okay.
Other people will say, well, maybe it's $1,000. Other people are going to say, well, the minimum in Pennsylvania is $500. And the answer is there's no written rule. Your clients could put down anything that they want to in escrow. However, the seller has to be willing to accept that money. So it's all subjective based on what the seller requires or feels comfortable with and how the agent on the other side is advising them.
Okay. And then also, can I ask you one more question? I'm so sorry.
No, this is what this is for. Ask away.
Because this was a question on the test. It said, if a buyer puts down, if a buyer puts down earnest money, who is it a credit to? And then the answers were all, and it said like, is it a credit to the buyer, a credit to the seller, or it said, is it a debt to the buyer, a debt to the seller? And so I was thinking, and I'm like, well, technically it's a credit to the seller because they're going to be getting that money, right? Because that's going to end up going on to.
No, so it is actually a credit to the buyer.
Because that puts money down, like that money, correct? Eventually.
So think of like earnest money is when a buyer places money in earnest, it remains their money until time of closing.
Okay.
So it is their money. They don't lose ownership of that money until there is settlement. Once settlement and acceptance happens, then they are giving that to the seller. So It is a credit to them. It's money that they've already paid. So it's sitting elsewhere.
Got it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It can be really confusing. It really can. And there's lots of like misinformation about escrow because of how we use it. So I've talked to a lot of agents before. They're like, oh, they put 0 on their escrow fund. So there's no consideration. Well, consideration can be a lot of things. It doesn't have to necessarily mean monetarily that we need monetary funds to have consideration on a contract.
Correct.
And then we also get confused where like they put it into escrow. Well, that's the seller's deposit. It's not. It's the buyer's deposit that is at risk should they breach the contract. And then depending on the terms of the contract, it would go to the seller. But until either we have settlement or there's a termination and release stating who that money goes to, it is the buyer's.
Okay.
What does the principle of substitution state? What is the principle of substitution? It is that a buyer won't pay more than a similar substitute property.
Okay.
So think of it this way. And this is the easiest way to think of it. You're going into a new housing development. Maybe it's like Miranda or Ryan or like one of those tract builder homes where most of the homes look exactly the same.
Yes.
And there's 2 exact models side by side, similar lots, same bedrooms, same features, everything. They're identical. One of the houses is listed for $500,000 and the other one is listed for $600,000. You have an open house on both properties at the same time. What would happen? Which home is selling first?
Probably the one that's.
Are we selling the $500,000 property first or the $600,000 property first? They're exactly the same.
500,000.
The 500,000. And why wouldn't we sell the 600,000?
Because it would look overpriced compared to the other one.
Correct, because a buyer won't pay more than a similar substitute property. So if we have 2 homes that are exactly the same in a tract built neighborhood, they both need to be listed the same unless they're no longer similar. So if we sold the one for 500,000 and we can't move the one for 600,000, we have to do one of 2 things. We either have to bring it down to 500,000 or we have to alter the property to make it different than the $500,000 property to be able to sell it for 600,000. Maybe we add a enclosed patio off the back. Maybe we install a swimming pool. Maybe we add another bathroom. Maybe we finish the basement. But the general rule of substitution is that a buyer won't pay more than a similar substitute property, which is why we do CMAs.
Right. That makes sense. That does.
What are the 4 elements of a valid contract?
Signature. Let me think here.
This is a tough one. It's tough when they ask for like a couple different things in order.
Okay, so it is consideration one of them?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, consideration, signature, meets all requirements. Is that one of them?
No, it is competent parties.
Competent parties.
Offer and acceptance, which would be your signature, legal purpose, and consideration. So competent parties, everybody needs to be competent and over the age of 18. Offer and acceptance, meaning somebody made an offer, the other party signed it and accepted it. It has to have clear legal purpose. So the terms have to be spelled out. It can't be like on a napkin, I'm buying your property. Okay, I'm going to sign. You can buy my property without any other terms. It has to have a very legal purpose. And there has to be some form of consideration. Again, that consideration is usually earnest money. Doesn't have to be. There's other things that can be considered consideration. And this is going to be funny, but just kind of to help you remember it, is the consideration could be the Trans Am. I have a Trans Am. I'm going to let you hold on to my Trans Am as consideration of this contract. It could be a John Deere tractor. It could be my consideration is that I'll come over and paint your house for no cost.
Okay.
Like it could literally be anything.
Okay.
We do not do that as real estate brokers and agents. We do not do any of those crazy considerations because it gets very muddy. It's open to litigation. Like, we don't do any of that. We just collect earnest money because that's the easiest way to do it. But if it is on your exam, which it was on mine for my broker exam, what can you accept as consideration? The answer is anything that's accepted by the parties.
Okay.
Question 16. What is the difference between an appraisal and an assessment?
An appraisal is the value of the home. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then an assessment.
You'll use this all the time in your career, almost every day.
So assessment has to do with taxes, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so an appraisal is the value of the home. The assessment is not what your taxes would be if you were the owner, correct?
Well, sort of.
Or like your taxes assessed, meaning like what your taxes would be as a group, like full property.
Sort of. They're both values. So your
Okay.
appraisal is your market value. And your assessment is your value for tax purposes. And I know that makes zero sense. They should both be the same, right?
Yeah.
They're not. So we talk a lot about like the different values you can have for your land. And then like there's lots of like, if you go on to like Facebook groups for real estate agents, there's a bunch of memes about this. Like what the realtor thinks it's worth, what the buyers think it's worth, what the bank thinks it's worth, what the taxing district thinks it's worth. And it's so true because
All different.
Yep, a real estate agent can come in and do a CMA and say, okay, this is what the listing price of the home. So this is the marketable value of the home. So I'm gonna come in and say that the marketable value of the home is 200,000. So we're gonna list it at 200,000. But then you accept an offer from a buyer for say 189. That's the buyer's value. Well, then the bank, because they're getting a loan, sends an appraiser out, and the bank wants to know what its market value is. And the appraiser comes out and says it's worth 175. Well, then the county comes and says, okay, well, we're going to appraise this property for an assessment purpose. And they may say that the home's worth 150. So who's right?
Right.
Who's right? You know, we have 200, we have 189, we have 175, we have 150.
And the seller's going to want to go with the highest.
Yeah, so it does. It gets really confusing. But an appraisal basically is the best function to tell you what your marketable value is. And only an appraisal is used when putting a mortgage on a property. Meanwhile, an assessment is usually just kind of a drive-by appraisal. So they have somebody that works for the county that just kind of drives around the county when they do reassessments. And they say, you know, based on the best data that we have, like this is what we think the home is worth within range. So this is what you're going to pay your taxes on. So a lot of consumers don't understand the differences between all of the values of their property. And we do have a lot of consumers that'll say, well, why would I pay 200,000 for this property when it's only assessed at 150? The assessment value has very little to do with the actual value of the property. You want to revert them back and let them know that the assessment is for tax purposes only. They haven't been inside the house. I mean, I can't say they haven't, but chances are pretty good they've never been inside the house. They just kind of take a drive past. They look at the comps in the area and they just kind of give you a roundabout of what you're paying taxes on.
Right.
And it's usually much lower, not always, but usually much lower than the actual value of the property. Your appraisal, which we're going to order for you, is where your protection comes in to make sure that the value of the property is in line with what you're going to be putting a mortgage on it for.
Okay. Makes sense though. That is crazy though that an assessment can put a value on your home when it's not very thorough.
Yeah, they do. And well, usually it's much lower than the actual value of the property, so nobody complains. But if you do get an assessment that is much higher than the actual value of your property, you can do an assessment appeal. And the same process goes through. So basically the taxing jurisdiction is going to do their own assessment, and then you would hire an independent appraiser. You would fill out a form and then submit that appraisal with, with the documents for the court, and then you can ask for that assessment to be reduced based on more accurate and thorough information.
Okay.
So, what is an amortization?
An amortization is is it when a loan is modified to be?
No, it's not modified.
Not modified, but like
Mm-mm.
the interest, you can pay like payments on the interest. Is that what it is?
Mm-mm.
No.
No, I mean, it does have to do with mortgages. So your amortization is the process of paying down a loan and regular payments over time. So if you look at an amortization schedule on any mortgage, it has principal and interest lines. And the very first payment on a mortgage has a huge amount going to the interest and a small amount going to the principal. And then every month you make a payment, the interest amount of that payment goes down slightly and the principal amount to that payment goes up slightly until you hit the very last payment on your loan, where 99% of it is going to principal and maybe 1% of it is going to interest. So it is the process of paying down a loan in regular payments over time. So amortization just means that a mortgage dies slowly with each payment.
Okay.
It's just dying slowly. Amortizing it means slowly dying off the payment.
Okay.
So at the very beginning, you're paying a high rate of interest. At the very bottom, you're paying a low rate of interest. So you pay the mortgage holder the majority of the interest up front. And then at the end of the loan, you're basically paying back yourself.
Okay.
What is a balloon payment?
I know this one too. Why can I not think of what it means?
I got a little tip to help you remember this one. All right, balloon payment. Balloon payment is when a large final loan payment is due at the end of the loan term.
Okay,
So think of balloon, a big pop at the end.
A big pop at the end. Okay.
Big pop at the end. So I have balloon payments. Okay, so this is pretty common, not in like residential type of homes, like not the average everyday first time home buyer. You're not going to deal with balloon payments a lot. But if you look at, or if you start working in commercial properties or investment real estate properties, like single family homes that are used for rentals, duplexes, triplexes, sometimes we get into these loans where they are termed loans with a balloon payment, meaning that I'm taking a loan on it. I'm going to pay a rate of interest over a period of time, but the loan ends in 5 years. Even though it's amortized for 15 years, the loan ends in 5 years, which means at the end of 5 years, I either have to come up with the cash and pay off the rest of the balance, or I have to refinance the note.
Okay.
So there's no extending of the note. So a lot of times consumers can reapply with the same banking institution and refinance that note. But other times they can't. So they have to go to another lending institution or they have to come up with cash. And if they don't, it balloons and they could lose their property. So it is a large final loan payment due at the end of the loan term. So balloon just means a big pop at the end. So you always want to proceed with caution when you have clients asking for a balloon type of note, and explain to them that, you know, these terms sound amazing right now, but the balloon period is in 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is. What are you going to do when your balloon is due? Because if you can't pay it off, then you lose your property.
Really? Okay. So that's how that it's they settle for less payments throughout and knowing that they're going to have that. So they have to kind of prepare for that. So
they do have to prepare for that. Yeah. There's all kinds of different mortgages. I mean, I know that in your studies, you've learned about like Fannie and Freddie style mortgages.
Yeah.
There are so many, like when you get into working with it, there are so many different types of loans and there's new ones being created every day. But a balloon loan's been around for a long time. And they can be really useful. As like I said, especially for investment properties, they can be very useful for somebody who just needs a short-term financing option. But always have clients proceed with caution and make sure that they're prepared, and have them talk to, a loan officer that you trust that can really give them the correct information and kind of be bad news bear if something would go awry.
Okay.
What is a property manager's primary responsibility?
Primary responsibility would be collect rent, do any of the office work for their tenants, things like that, and work for the landlord. They work.
You're on the right track. So a property manager's primary responsibility is to protect the owner's investment and maximize income.
Okay.
This is why property managers are not popular with tenants, because their primary job, their fiduciary responsibility to their client is to protect the owner's investment and maximize income. So a property manager is a money protector and rent collector. So when we think of protecting the owner's investment, we think about, okay, well, if there is a tenant in there that's destroying the property, it is the property manager's job to remove that tenant as quickly as possible to minimize any further damage. It's also the property manager's responsibility that if the roof starts leaking and causing damage to the property, that they get that fixed right away so that the property doesn't continue to depreciate. So they're protecting the house.
Okay.
They're also needing to maximize the income. So property managers are notorious for increasing rents, charging fees, beating on doors when rents don't get collected, and they're putting the collection of rent over and above the needs, especially those that are cosmetic or just inconvenient to the tenant, because they don't represent the tenant, they represent the seller. So that's why property managers always get a bad rap, in my opinion. They're doing their fiduciary responsibility to the seller to the landlord by putting the landlord first, because that is their job. Legally, that is their job. So it's what it is. Property managers are never in a position where they're popular.
Right. That is very.
So, and when you tell tenants this, I'm like, this is, the fiduciary responsibility of the property manager. They don't want to hear it,
Right. It's.
So, what is the purpose of a home inspection?
A home inspection would be to make sure everything is up to code.
Nope. Has nothing to do with code.
Or not code, but isn't it more like electrical things like that, like making sure everything is safe?
Safe, yes. Yes, finding the safety of the property to identify any physical defects in the property. Inspector means a property detective.
Okay.
But it is a common misconception that the inspector checks for code violations, checking to make sure things are up to code. And although the home inspector can shed some light on that, they are not code inspectors. So that's outside of their license responsibility. They're not truly certified in that, even though they have some background in that. But it's just to identify any physical defects of the property and inform the clients of what they're purchasing. So they're a property detective. To see if something is up to code. So code is a unified building code that is enacted from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. That would be a code enforcement officer or a code inspector that would verify whether something is truly up to code or not.
Okay.
So we use code a lot, very loosely. Code will come in to your real estate practices, but that usually varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So Beaver Falls Code and Newcastle Code may use different versions of the Unified Code book, and they may have different processes for doing it.
Okay.
So, but the home inspector can kind of tell you, hey, based on today's building code, and that's how they're going to inspect it. If this house was built today, this is what would have to be corrected. However, based on different areas, like Newcastle was built 150 years ago, a lot of those items are not going to meet new construction building code because they are grandfathered due to the age of the property. So the rules are a little bit more laxed in those areas.
Okay.
All right. So how do you think you did today?
I think you did pretty good. There's still a couple definitions that I think fully know in my head, like memorization, things like that. Like I need to just keep studying, and I don't know. I just got to keep my head in this book so I can get this national done.
Yeah, just keep doing it. Just keep doing it. And every time you get on there, the questions are going to be different. There are literally hundreds of different questions that go through these state and national tests. So sometimes it's just the luck of the draw too. So I tell students that all the time. Like just because you didn't pass the first test you did doesn't mean you're not going to pass the next one. It's kind of like question Russian roulette.
Right.
They are just randomly generated through a computer system. It doesn't mean you don't know your stuff, but I promise you, like I sat down and did a mock test with one of the students, and I've been licensed for in November, it'll be 18 years.
Okay.
And I did not get a perfect score.
Because it's just the way they word stuff. And
Yeah, like when I got the answer, I was like, oh, you know what? I didn't see the word not in there.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Or, you know, some of them I had to look up and I'm like, well, I really thought that was the answer. And then I Google it. And I'm like, oh shit, that's not the answer. You know?
Well, there's one yesterday. Like I told you, I had like a couple like square foot math problems, and the one said something that I had never even heard of. It said, you know, it gave you it wasn't even about a home. It was just about it said a piece of land. It gave you the width and the depth.
Uh-huh.
And then it said it was $4 per square foot. And it wanted to, you know, it wanted you to find that number. But then it said, and then $12 per, and I think it said like, did it say like front foot, center foot, something like that? Like, I didn't even know what that meant. Like, I'm trying to even think what the word said. It said, and then $12 per something else foot, but it wasn't square foot. It said a different word there. Like, I didn't even, have you ever heard of that?
I'd have to see the question. I really would, but
I was like, why? I don't even know how to.
We have another student that keeps sweating all the math. And I'm like, you literally are probably going to get 2 math questions.
Right. Just like, don't even worry about the math.
Yeah, don't sweat too much about I mean, obviously you want to know the calculations and things like that. I mean, if you know anything, know how many square feet are in an acre. You know, but I mean, and I would say figuring out the square foot of a lot, you know, like if you have a lot that's 100 by 50, knowing how many square feet are there, or understanding, you know, how to calculate an ROI. But those are pretty much the most common questions. I mean, everything else that we use day to day, I mean, we use a calculator in real life.
Right.
So like, but he's so scared about it. I'm like, you just got to roll with it. You just got to do the best you can. As long as you know, like the principle, as long as you know how to do it, like, you know, square footage is front feet times depth feet will give you, if it's a square lot, will give you the square footage, you know, front times depth. Those are the things that you're going to use from day to day, but you're never going to be to a point where you're never going to have a calculator in front of you. So as long as you know the principles behind it, you're going to be okay in your career.
Just know the formulas and
just know the formula.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
And if you forget the formula, ask ChatGPT.
That is very true. That's helpful these days. It really is. I'm going to, we had football camp this morning, so I was running before this. So I